Well, today I want to follow up where we left off yesterday. We were talking about secret sins yesterday, and today I want to explore that in another way. Is there anything as such a thing as a private sin, or what we might call a victimless sin? So I'd really like to dig into that, following up on Paul's statement where he said good deeds are obvious, and even those that are not good deeds, cannot be hidden. So we quoted out of Psalms, out of Proverbs, even Jesus in Luke 12 told us that basically everything is ultimately going to be disclosed. And so if we're hypocritical, we're foolish, because sooner or later we're going to be found out for the hypocrite that we are. By the way, I just thought I'd mention something about my t-shirt. You see this t-shirt with this beaver on it. This is called a Buc-ee's. Buc-ee's is an amazing place that we find all through the South and the Midwest. It's basically a massive gas station, the size of Toledo, with a store that's unlike any gas station store you've ever seen in your life. I mean, they have everything. It's more like a Walmart in the middle of nowhere. I got the t-shirt because it's kind of phenomenal. And if you're ever driving across the South and the Midwest, you'll certainly see an advertisement for a Buc-ee's, and just for the cultural experience, you need to go in. They got the most amazing brisket and pulled pork sandwiches I think I've ever had, but that's beside the point. Just a fun thing to do. So I recommend it to you if you've never had the opportunity to experience a Buc-ee's. The only caution is they won't allow large trucks to park there. So it's just all people who are basically driving private automobiles, some RVs and campers and things like that, but you don't see any large 18-wheelers driving in there with, it's not a truck stop, it is a car stop, and they have cheap gasoline too. I think we were there, what are we paying here in Spokane? Like $4.50 a gallon at the best, and there it was about $2.43 a gallon, $2 cheaper than we pay here. So check it out. You might want to just drive to Buc-ee's, find a Buc-ee's and drive to it just to get the gasoline at a cheaper rate. But anyway, let me get back on point here. Forgive me for that diversion. But I think one of the things I left off talking about yesterday was, is there any real thing such as what we call a private sin, a sin that's is done in secret and it doesn't affect anybody else? And I think William Barclay put it really well when he said that maybe if you lived in the middle of the ocean on an isolated island, you could probably call your sin private, I guess, because there's no one there else to be affected. But the truth of the matter is, there's an old saying that says, no man is an island. And what that means is every one of us affects other people in some way. I mean, when you go to the store, you may not have a conversation with a single person, but the way you carry yourself, whether you're joyful, whether you're peaceful, whether you're going through sorrow, whether you're depressed, whether you're angry, basically our body speaks as loudly as our lips many times. And also, I find what's really interesting that I complain to my wife sometimes. I'm probably guilty as anybody, but sometimes, going into Costco and you feel like you've entered into a race. It's kind of like people are running around with their carts and they're cutting in front of you, and it's like people are really, really in a hurry, and maybe they justifiably are. Maybe they're trying to buy a fire extinguisher because their house is on fire. But the whole point is that their focus on their task and the way they go about focusing on fulfilling their task really communicates something about themselves and what they think about those of the rest of us who are being run over and cut off by them. The whole point is that everything we do touches everybody else in some kind of significant way. And that's why we have to understand that our lives are always supposed to be under the focus of the Holy Spirit, that God is watching my every thought, my every intention, my every action, my every word. And I know that sounds overwhelming and terrifying, but I don't think it should be, because it's not like God is just looking for something to find a fault with you. The truth of the matter is, he wouldn't have to look at all, because we all kind of display our faults all the time in various ways. But the reality is, when it says in Romans 6:23 that the wages of sin are death, it's essentially saying that there is this inherent principle of the universe. It's almost like hardwired into the very creation, because as he tells us in Genesis 1, 3 times, verse 11, 21, 25, that people recreate after their own kind. And so what we do is we have an effect upon the world around us, and we really recreate ourselves into the lives of other people and how we interact and treat other people, what we think about other people, feel about them. And that's why even the issue of praying for other people is such an important deal. Something that I was really challenged by, really convicted by today in my own prayer time with the Lord was that there are people who I feel have been unfair to me or done things that were hurtful and painful. And it's so easy to kind of sit around and grousing and complaining about what was done to you. But the simple fact is that the Bible tells us we should pray for people who despitefully use us, and we should love our enemies, because there's something profoundly healing when you start praying for somebody else whom you feel has mistreated you or treated you unfairly or been unkind and been unloving. You know, when somebody tells you they're your friend and then they aren't. Friendship is forever, and if somebody's a friend, then they're your friend forever, not because you did something that made them mad. So the reality is that if you plant, corn in the ground, you're not going to be waiting for beets to come up. You know it's going to come up, something after the kind of what you planted. If you plant anger, resentment, hatred, jealousy, pride, and all those kind of things, all those things are going to come back to you. They're going to be the things that are going to grow up, and it's a terrible harvest to have to live with. And so if there's anything that I think we really need to be sensitive to is to pick up on the slightest degree of resentment, the smallest bit of resentment that begins to grow up in our hearts, that little momentary thought we think, well, how could they do that to me? And that's so unfair, because that resentment will begin to grow into bitterness, and bitterness will grow into anger, and anger will grow into malice, which is sitting around trying to figure out some way to get even or get back at somebody. And you end up really polluting and corrupting your own soul. My wife and I were watching this British movie on the plane the other day when we were flying back from Florida, and the movie's called Living. I think it's really worthwhile. It's not a spiritual movie, but it's a very insightful movie about a man who realizes that he's going to die, and he makes some significant amendments to how he treats people. And in the midst of trying to help some people, he's running into all this opposition from bureaucrats, of whom he is one. And one of the ladies who was very frustrated said, "Doesn't it make you angry?" And he says, "Madam, I don't have time to get angry." And his point was that I'm not going to live that long. I'm not going to waste any of those moments on getting angry about this. But I thought, what a wise and insightful saying. That we waste a lot of time getting angry. We waste a lot of time being resentful, because of the things that have happened to us. I know many of us grew up in homes where, our parents didn't really prepare us to be mentally healthy. They may have helped prepare us to be the otherwise. And yet I've often told people, if you're insightful enough to recognize the things that your parents did wrong in raising you and treating you, then you're wise enough to not allow that to define you any longer. And therefore, because if you let that offense define you, you will find yourself beginning to act out in exactly the same ways. And you will reap the same fruit that your parents reaped in the results of how they treated you. So it's really important, I think, that every one of us has associations, and there's no thing that I do that is without some consequence. Everything has a cause and effect, that every action has an equal reaction. Equal and opposite reaction. So we need to understand that we don't just simply live our lives the way we want it without regard to anybody else. When Jesus says we should love our neighbor as we love ourselves, he's really giving us good advice for ourselves. Because if we want ourselves to be loved and liked and treated well, then we're going to focus on doing that with others as well. And when we don't get surprised if you stretch the rubber band too far, it's going to snap back, and you're the one who's going to feel the pain. So even in a social or moral sense, when we talk about certain things like prostitution or addiction and so forth as being victimless crimes, there's nothing more untrue than that. That when we look at people who are living in homelessness and living in addiction, living in sexual immorality and so forth, there are lots and lots of victims. I wonder how many young children are going to grow up in fatherless homes. According to statistics, it's going to be about half the youth population of our nation at this point in time will grow up in homes without fathers, because somewhere in there, either a dad didn't want to be responsible, or maybe in some cases they passed away by no blame of their own. But oftentimes there are children, in fact, in the African American community, 70% of the children that are being born in black communities don't have a father in the house. So the children, people say, well, having sex is a victimless crime. Oh yeah? Well, the child comes, a wife who has to carry the child for 9 months and then support it for the rest of the next 18 years and deal with the behavior that comes as a consequence, are clearly the victims of someone only thinking about themselves. So it's important, I think, that we begin to look through and think these things through clearly, because there clearly is no such thing as a victimless crime. A little more to say about this tomorrow, and so hope you'll join with me as we continue the conversation.